Bret Weinstein. Many of you are already familiar with him. He was a professor at Evergreen State College, which was in my neck of the woods as a reporter in Seattle, south of Seattle. That's where he was. And he's an evolutionary biologist, and you're probably all familiar with his Dark Horse podcast, and recently had a video removed talking to Dr. Pierre Corey about ivermectin. And Wikipedia now is saying he and his wife are spreading misinformation. So this is his Wikipedia entry now. Bret Samuel Weinstein is an American evolutionary biologist and podcaster who came to national attention during the 2017 Evergreen State College protests. He is among the people referred to collectively as the intellectual dark web. Weinstein and his wife, Heather Haying, am I saying that right, have spread misinformation about the COVID-19 pandemic on numerous occasions. Well, let's see what they mean by that, because they have 5, 6, and 7 here. Well, let's see what number 5 says. Okay. Why is the intellectual dark web suddenly hyping an unproven COVID treatment? This is from Vice. Okay, so Vice decided that they are spreading misinformation. Let's see what it is. And it appears that they're talking about, it must be ivermectin. Let's see here. Blah, blah, blah. We're going to scroll down. We're going to scroll down. We're going to scroll down. Scroll down. Yep, it is. Both the NIH and the European Medicines Agency say that ivermectin shouldn't be used for COVID-19 treatment outside of ongoing clinical trials, the results of which have been muddled and not quite the definitive positive result that advocates have hoped for. So, and then they say, as the NIH puts it, some clinical studies showed no benefits or worsening of disease after ivermectin use, whereas others reported shorter time to resolution of disease manifestations that were attributed to COVID-19, greater reduction in inflammatory marker levels, shorter time to viral clearance, or lower mortality rates. Okay, so they're saying it is possible that ivermectin works. As I showed you before, the WHO has just said it doesn't have the data. How is that misinformation to allow someone to say that it worked on their patients? So, okay, Wikipedia is citing Vice. Let's go back and see what else. What else are they doing? Number 6. COVID vaccines are not cytotoxic. You know what? This is probably where I should not be talking anymore, because I don't know what YouTube's going to do about that. But let's just see what they say, okay? This is Reuters. Okay, we're going to talk about this with Dr. Malone on ROKFIN. I'm not going to get into this topic because this is where YouTube's going to smash me down. But I want to show you why Bret's now in Wikipedia for being a disinformation agent, okay? So, fact check, COVID-19 vaccines are not cytotoxic, Reuters. And there's his podcast with Dr. Malone. Again, has a sick full, going to be in one of my videos later. And guy is literally an inventor of mRNA vaccines. Apparently, Reuters knows better. Okay, let's go to the last one, shall we? 7. PolitiFact. No sign that the COVID-19 vaccine spike protein is toxic or cytotoxic. Here's the article. PolitiFact. The COVID-19 vaccine's spike protein is very dangerous. It's cytotoxic. That's the claim. And then they say no sign that COVID-19 vaccines or spike protein is toxic or cytotoxic. Now, again, without getting into this issue directly, because what I know Dr. Malone's going to say is he's going to talk about the Salk Institute, which has said that that's in fact not true, what PolitiFact and the others are saying. But let's just stay to the topic of who Wikipedia is using as their authority on this, okay? Vice, PolitiFact, and Reuters. And this is why I say that journalism and science are impossible to do on YouTube, because YouTube is just like Wikipedia. Here they are just using mainstream corporate news sources that are using governmental organizations, and that's it. It's like Dr. Malone has called it before. It's like techno-fascism. They're all just repeating the same talking points. And journalism and science, in my experience, has been about questioning that. You know, just asking the questions doesn't mean you always arrive at the conclusion that you may or may have not thought you were going to. So maybe you end up debunking yourself. But the process itself is what's important. And the fact that you can't even ask these questions and you can't talk about stuff. People aren't allowed to share their stories, you know, because it just currently isn't, you know, with the government, which is extremely slow, by the way, on research. And I will add one other thing as a former environmental reporter. I worked with environmental nonprofits constantly who wouldn't speak out on stuff they were working on that challenged the government narrative because they needed the government for funding and permitting. So if you were a marine mammal research organization Everybody knows you can't get near a marine mammal because of the Marine Mammal Protection Act without a permit from NOAA. So I knew lots of environmental groups that thought NOAA was, you know, a group of with a bunch of bullies and and weren't doing things appropriately. But they didn't speak out about it. Why? Because they were going to lose all the funding that they needed to survive. And would lose their permits to do the very research. Even if they had the funding, they'd lose their permit. The government controls everything. So just because a scientist isn't saying something, or a nonprofit research group or whatever else isn't saying something, or the research isn't there yet, that doesn't mean it's not valid research, or it doesn't mean that there aren't criticisms or pushbacks from actual scientists. It's that there's a chilling effect, a control, handcuffing of people who are asking questions and doing research, because the system is set up for the people doing the work to need the approval of the people who don't want them doing the work. And it's a sick cycle. And then you end up with the tech companies telling you that the corporate media, which then cites the government, which is in control of the permits and the funding. You see how this just goes round and round and round and round, and you can't break it. You can't break it. The only people allowed to break it are the government, or basically the tech companies deciding that the corporate media is saying something different, and so now you're allowed to talk about it. But basically they're just changing their tune because the government says it. So I think it in a lot of cases just goes back to the bureaucratic sources. So that's how you end up getting smeared in Wikipedia. God forbid Reuters or PolitiFact, which changed its tune. We can all remember that one, right? Yeah, this is it. Archive fact check. Oh, it's archived now. It's not. I'm surprised I could find it. Tucker Carlson guest airs debunked conspiracy theory that COVID-19 was created in a lab. And then it says editor's note. When this fact check was first published in September 2020, PolitiFact sources included researchers who asserted the SARS-CoV-2 virus could not have been manipulated. That assertion is now more widely disputed. For that reason, we are removing this fact check from our database, pending a more thorough review. Currently, we consider the claim to be unsupported by evidence and in dispute. The original fact check in its entirety is preserved below for transparency and archival purposes. Oh, thank you for doing that. So, PolitiFact can be wrong. All the corporate news organizations can be wrong. I'm doing a totally separate video where I have downloaded nightly news and something from CNN where they made claims that violate the community guidelines, and the videos are still up. How? How is that possible? Oh, it's because the only people allowed to make mistakes and go through the process of learning new things and changing their mind are people that are part of the establishment, the power structure. They're allowed to do that, not the rest of us. Nope. We're not allowed to challenge. We're not allowed to make mistakes. We're not allowed to go through the process of learning. We're not allowed to do any of those things because who are we? We're outside the big party. When I have people on my channel, I'm not endorsing what they're saying. If I say I agree with you, then I'm endorsing what they're saying. But just because I let somebody speak, that just means I want to hear what they have to say. And I'm not going to just listen to, a bunch of corporate or governmental sources tell me who's allowed to be listened to. I'm going to listen to who I want to listen to, and I'm going to make up my own mind. And, God forbid, that's what I thought that we did in journalism. I thought that's what we did, was say, hey, that's weird. This person's saying something different. That was the whole, you used to love the day that you had a source come into the office and say, hey, I got something to tell you about that's been happening in the government, or I got something to tell you about that goes completely opposite to the narrative of this corporation or whatever. And I'm going to show you what I know and tell you what I know. I mean, that used to be something that journalists used to get. I mean, and still do. I know a lot of investigative journalists that still do get excited by something like that. But if you look at the community guidelines on YouTube, it's just impossible. I'm just going to show you one last thing, okay? Community guidelines, medical misinformation, YouTube. Okay? We can't read all of this because it would literally take hours. This is how long it is. These are all the examples of how you violate. Look at this. I mean, claims that COVID-19 vaccine will kill people who receive it. Is this not something that is already being discussed? I mean, isn't that already something that we've seen in the news? That's why they paused the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Can't say that. It's just there's you just can't do anything. Like, you literally cannot talk about anything that even the things that are already out there you can't talk about. So if you think that you're getting real information on YouTube, and I'm telling you this much, if you're watching a COVID video on YouTube, especially like related to a particular number of sensitive topics, and I'm just going to let you guys think of what that is, it is highly likely that that video is still there because it is pushing propaganda. Or they just haven't caught on to it yet. Unless it's like a lot of the stuff out there now is just getting slammed down, that even if there's documentation, they just don't care. They just don't care. So be wary of the stuff that you're able to see on YouTube. Some of it, there is some that's making it out there, but the vast majority of it is coming from sources that, are allowed to speak because they're just touting a particular narrative that's acceptable and fits this, content that recommends use of ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine for the treatment of COVID-19. Claims that ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine are effective treatments for COVID-19. You can't say any of that stuff. Content that recommends use of ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine for the prevention of COVID-19. Claims that wearing a mask is dangerous or causes negative physical effects. Yeah, I just, I don't know. It's a long list. It's a long list. I love wine, and my favorite kind of wine is a high-altitude Argentinian Malbec. And now you can get 50% off some of my favorite bottles and 50% off shipping by visiting AllisonWinePromo.com. That's Allison with one L, winepromo.com. These wines come from one of the most isolated winemaking regions in the world, with the Andes Mountains on one side and desert on the other. One of the Malbecs is from the third highest vineyard in the world at 8,950 feet. The reason I love these wines is the altitude means that the UV rays beating down on the grapes is making them work harder, and doctors I talk to say they have higher antioxidant properties. Again, it's AllisonWinePromo.com, Allison with one L, winepromo.com.